Have you ever had a dream that even you could create something great? That's something that you can be proud of, that other people can be proud of and enjoy? Well, I've had that dream, and I'd like to show you how I'm going to achieve that dream. I would like to begin by making the best models I can be so that my game that I would eventually like to make has the best things possible. I do not make Blender tutorials, and I never will. So please don't stick around if that is what you're looking for. What I'm going to do is show you my journey. And with all that being said, let's get into it. What we want to do is just to block in the basic colors of the model and follow its geometry. We don't want to add color in random spots after all. That would just make the model look confusing. What I'm doing here is marking out some metallic areas that I want to make all shiny and nice later on and keep it separate from the painted areas. In order to get started to the fun stuff, we first need to select our colors. I set out with the goal in mind to make this model blue and orange, but I've also got a visor on this car, so I need to make that a different shade of blue or else it'll blend into the hull too much. The first step is to choose your colors and always save them to your palette, or else you'll scramble like a dingus trying to remember what shade of hue you were using until you eventually just say screw it and pick a similar looking yet different color and remember to save that. Now that we've got our color, we can move on to the technique. We're going to take our brush and paint over everything but leaving the corners as the original darker color. This is going to make it look like it's got its own shadows in the background without using any special lighting techniques. And that also means that if we do choose to do something funny with the lighting, it'll still look good. What we're going to do is we're going to keep layering on this color but with lighter and lighter hues. So we still use the original color, and what this is going to do is it's going to make a transition effect, and for glass especially it needs to be more subtle so that it really pops. What you need to do is use at least three different hues, because that way you'll get a really smooth transition even if you don't intend to blend them, which I don't. I find the harsher transition a bit more charming. What you'll end up with is a model that looks like it has shadows in it even in the absence of light, which means if your actual light that you come in doesn't have to be as meticulous, which for people like me who isn't as experienced in lighting itself is a bit of a cheat code. So there's a freebie for all of you watching at home. The final part of the texture process comes in the form of the material properties of the object. This is not a small detail. Pay very close attention to your model's surface properties. Glass, for instance, is very reflective, which is going to shock some of you in my audience, while metal is not as shiny as glass but still more reflective than a painted surface. What you want to do is make sure that whatever you select is best for the model and for the texture. Now that our glass is looking all shiny, we're going to move on to blocking out more of the model. I'm going to go around frantically turning each and every piece of metal bit I can find into looking like a metal bit. What this is doing is adding a lot of visual interest to a model as opposed to a chromatic model where your eyes don't know what to focus on. If you don't believe me, look at a blank page and try and focus on any point on that blank page. And if you try and argue against it saying, oh yeah, there's no point, well, there you go. There's no visual interest to focus on. Next, I'll move on to the tire. If this car was a character, the tires would be like the hands or the boots, well worn and well used. If it's all black and matte and looked like it just rolled off the factory floor, it wouldn't be very suitable for a post-apocalyptic wasteland, for instance. Even though that's not quite what I'm going for, I absolutely want some wear on these tires, which is why you'll see me adding highlights to the tips of the tires, which will experience the most wear out of the entire thing. I'm further adding highlights to the rims and to the middle, which I believe would also rub against things like other cars, debris, dirt, what have you. Once we're done admiring how good these tires look, what you'll want to do next is forget to leave the recording on while you leave the room and do other things. Once you finally get back to your desk and realize what's been going on, You then go to the front of the vehicle and you begin painting that as well. The goal here is to highlight the high points and keep the recesses nice and dark to keep a lot of contrast going. That might be an issue given how curvy the model is, but I'll show you how I did it. Now, I know a lot of you would actually like to see me paint the front of this model, so I'm going to take this time here to explain to you a bit of how the topology works. And before you click off, yeah, it does actually matter. It's very important in Blender. I'm bringing this up because I face an issue later on where I just cannot color in a few pixels of the model, and this is because my topology wasn't mapped out correctly. But how do I map out the topology, I hear you ask, from all the way over here, back in time? Well, that is a fantastic question. How it works is your 3D mesh has all its geometry, vertices, and everything mapped out on a 2D surface. This is how a 2D texture can be applied to a 3D object. Now, my topology wasn't mapped out quite good enough, even though I thought I had. And that's why you'll see me having these issues. The keen-eyed among you may have noticed that I'm actually putting shadow back into those painstakingly painted highlights. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm following the curvature of the model, adding in some darker areas to where they would naturally fall on it. This makes the model look a bit more natural and a bit more interesting, in spite of the fact that there isn't that much going on the model itself. This is the advantage of using textures. Now we can sit back and admire the absolutely flawless texture work that we have done without any faults whatsoever. What's that, dear viewer? You attempt to communicate through time and space once again? But I thought this was a Mad Max universe with elves in it. It doesn't look very That's enough, viewer. I hear your concerns. And to address them, we shall be adding futuristic glowy bits to the model. Not only will this help with visual interest even more, it'll also make the model look more alive, as glowy bits are a clear indicator of something functioning to complete capacity. Now we can finally come back to the glorious orange. Most of this you've already seen before on the front of the model, so I won't retread most of it here. The ideas are the same, using dark orange in the recesses, going lighter and lighter until finally appearing on a highlight on top, with the topmost highlight being used more sparingly. What we're going to do next is focus a bit on the glowy parts. I find this a bit interesting because you'd actually want to do the opposite of what we've been doing so far. Start with a lighter color on the edges and go darker and darker towards the middle. What this is going to do is it's going to draw the eye inwards, sort of guiding it deeper and deeper into the ephemeral glow of our exhaust or whatever else glow bit we've got. Though it may not be realistic, I decided to put a lot of venti parts on this model to really sell the whole Mad Maxi effect. And thanks to our nice blue bright glow effects, that's going to help sell the whole elven feel as well. So in a sense, you really just want to get that Mad Max elf feel down with this one. Now, because the glow part is everywhere, and it also sticks out a lot, choosing its color is very important. You can see how I chose to make it a similar color to the glass, just to tie everything back to the whole model, and make the glass look a little less sticky outy than everything else. It really just gives a sense of uniformity to the model, and like you've planned all this ahead, as opposed to just make it up on the spot. Next, we're going to go on to the blue. Because it's such a prominent part of the model, we're going to have to spend a little extra time here. Maybe add a little extra hue or what have you. Now this is going to be a bit different from the glass because it's a lot deeper of a blue and it's not going to be nearly as shiny once we start editing the surface properties. Other than that, it's basically the same as the orange, except in our recesses it's not going to be quite as stark a contrast because it's a bit of a cooler color and the orange already has that pot covered. If we had such a contrast on the blue as well, it would look like a much busier model and your eye wouldn't quite know where to focus on. When it comes to visual interest, you'll often find that there are very busy areas where your eye likes to wander and very flat areas where your eye sort of skims over. We say the eye sort of rests in these spots, and that's what we want this blue to be. A nice, soothing, soft transition where your eye can just rest and recover from the chaotic orange. Now we finish with the highlights. Remembering that we wanted this to be a bit more subtle than the orange, the highlights are going to be really hard to spot on first glance, but you'll really notice it if you look deeply into the model. But other than that, the same principles apply. You just put it on the edges of the model. Try not to go into the recesses of the curves, even though it may be difficult. And as for sharp corners, that's real easy. But you'll see more of those once we get to the metal section, which happens to be right now. Now, the main difference between metal and everything else is that much like the glowy parts that we painted earlier, we're going to be reversing our highlighting process, having the brightest parts be on the edges and the darkest parts in the middle. This worked for the glowy part because it sort of drew you into the whole glowy ephemeralness of it. But with the metal, we're more doing it so to show the reflectiveness of the surface. So the idea is to make the illusion that the edges of the metal is catching the light as you're looking at it. Whereas the other sections that we've painted so far is more to simulate paint, which is more dry and matte and sort of wears more closely to the tips of the object it is. Finally, after you've finished painting the rest of the blue and metal parts off camera, because this video is starting to get long, what you want to do is start making it look real presentable. And for that, we're going to look at some animation. Now, I am a lot more familiar with painting theory and color values and what have you than I am with animation. But like I'm sure many of you are, I am addicted to devices and have watched countless hours of many media. So I'm obviously an expert. What I'll do is I'll begin with an establishing shot on a sort of zoomed in part of the model with visual interest. My idea here is to create a sense of interest without showing the entire model. Next, I'll have the camera move and show towards the front of the model. The goal here is to show what the model can actually do, which is why I'm zooming in on the grappling hook. The grappling hook is attached to a chain because there's no other material it could possibly use. Now, I use the hook modifier in order to get the chain working nice and lacquer how I want it. The problem is it's not parented properly, and I had not set that up because it's the most recent thing I did before I had started recording. So I had a little bit of issues here. Eventually I fixed it by just doing a whole lot of rigmarole, adding a lot of empties and pairing it to empties, and geez, it just took way too long. If you are for some reason following along with me, it is at this point in the project that you'll need to forget that you had not painted the hook or the chain yet. So you'll have to stop animating for a second, go paint that, and then get back to animating and continue the video. Next, we start by shooting things with the grapple hook. Unfortunately, there were some problems with animating the thing because of how it was parented to the MT that I was using to control the grapple hook, but I fixed it by just manually animating the hook and chain. Next, the chain wasn't really long enough, so I had to sort of extend it mid-shoot, but I think it looks alright. Unfortunately, if you do it a bit wrong, then you're going to have a bit of limp chain sticking out your model. Our grapple's working and that's great. Except it isn't though, because our car isn't being affected by it at all. So now we're just going to have the car follow the path of the chain and eventually end up where it's going. We also want the camera to follow along what's happening because it's no use you animate and then no one sees it. Our car's moving, but it doesn't feel like it's moving. What I mean by that is when the grapple pulls the car, there isn't really much of a reaction happening at all. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to simulate a little jerk that the car would experience once it's being grappled. During the process, we find some other means of entertainment, but eventually we fix it and get along with our lives. and we begin rigging the car and the wheels separately. The wheels and the main body of the car needs to be separate because when we simulate suspension, the wheels still need to maintain contact with the ground. Even though you can't really see the ground because I'm animating in a void, it's still critical to maintain that illusion. So the mass of the vehicle needs to move while the wheels remain stationary. And, well, as funny as this is, we still have an animation to make. So we fix it by simply removing the keyframes off what used to be the main control panel, being the larger empty, and just shifting it on the smaller one. All that just to get a little jolt out of this section of the video. But don't worry, we'll use it again later. It's important to maintain the illusion of reality with little details like this. Call me ambitious, but I really wanted this car to do a backflip during this animation. It's what I always had in mind for it. Unfortunately, Blender doesn't always play along. Sometimes it gets confused while rotating with animation, but thankfully we can fix it by rotating the car in place at the destination where we want it. We need to make the car look like it's hanging in the air for a while. This gives the camera time to catch up and make sure that our camera isn't too fast, otherwise it'll be too disorienting. The idea is to make the back wheels hit the ground first, followed by the front, so it gives us a beautiful little jolt. For those curious, this is what happens if you do not slow down the camera. The whole point is to show off a little bit, so we're going to make the model spin in front of the camera and adjust the camera accordingly so that the model remains in view. Just because the model isn't moving doesn't mean it has an excuse to be static. Remember, this is a vehicle and it's got many vents and exhaust pipes and such that can vibrate and give off a real sense of readiness and idling. This is done by having the vent move left and right, up and down very quickly. Don't go overboard here because it'll look a little bit strange if it's too much. And also remember to do the back vent too. Our car isn't going anywhere without spinning wheels, so we're going to make them rotate nice and fast to give the car a sense of speed. Just don't make them rotate too fast or some paranormal activity will occur. As strange as the aliens are, I would actually like to get into a bit more of a serious topic. At this point in the project, I started to look more and more at the model, and it just looked more and more wrong the more I looked at it. Eventually, I found that the roughness values were not exactly right. Once I started playing with them, I felt a lot better about how the thing was looking. I also decided to change up some of the glowy bits to look a bit more hostile, shall we say. I kept these confined to the wheels and the exhausts, as I felt like they would be more rough and ready. The point here is not to be too rigid to one plan, be adaptable, and don't be afraid to step back and doubt yourself every once in a while, just so long as something good comes from it. With our inner demons defeated, and one last crash because you tried to render in cycles, we can add a rim light in the form of a area light to the back of our model, just to make it pop that extra bit more, and now it's on to the glamour shots. I really appreciate everyone who stuck around this far. Thank you for watching the video. If you like what you saw, please like so I know that this is what you want to see, because this is still new to me and I'd like to make more. Catch you next time.